Hello. With the current rise of the Taliban, it says, I've seen programs saying they're resurgent, taking over Pakistan and possibly Afghanistan. How can you keep this very light military presence and still achieve anything?
Well, I mean, not to be overly simplistic, because it's a very difficult situation, but clearly dealing with the Taliban is a little bit like dealing with drugs. In the end, the international community can provide some support, it can provide some training, it can provide some technical assistance, but any lasting solution has to be an Afghan solution. Right? It requires villagers in southern Afghanistan to not be interested in providing passive support. It requires the Afghan government, the Afghan police, the Afghan army to take the initiative in a counterinsurgency campaign. And it will require political negotiation of the sort the Afghan government is beginning. The danger of our obsession with victory or defeat, you know, President-elect Obama saying, I'm going to defeat the Taliban, we're going to win a victory, is that it's casting us in the wrong light. It's not within our gift. I mean, no amount of American troops on their own are going to be able to defeat the Taliban, right? This is fundamentally a process which is going to have a political component, require political leadership, and foreigners, particularly us, are not in a position to provide that kind of leadership. Afghanistan is almost like a country being reborn. It requires founding fathers. It requires to find its own Thomas Jefferson, its own Ataturk, its own Lee Kuan Yew. It needs to find the ability to frame a concept to the country which appeals to the population and which in the end puts the current government in a strong enough position in relation to the Taliban for them to be able to, through a combination of force and political negotiation, at least contain and manage the problem. But I don't think 3 more combat brigades is going to do that. Sorry, there was a question from here. Okay, very good. Please, yeah.
I was wondering, what do you think about our aid money? I've heard Afghan leaders complain that the money isn't funded to the government. It's funded through companies or NGOs, and we should really channel the money through the government to give them more credibility with the people. And then I read in the paper, like the transportation minister, I think, was just let go recently, and we talk about transparency and accountability. So.
Well, this is a big question, and again, I think we tend to be a little bit black and white about this. The big debate is, do we give all the money to the government, or do we give money to foreign NGOs? And we go back and forth, and you can imagine what the arguments are. The reason you want to give money to the Afghan government is that by giving money to the Afghan government, then the people see that the services are provided by the Afghan government. That's good for the popularity, the credibility of the Afghan government. It provides the impetus for the Afghan government to develop its own capacity and skills. And on the other hand, what is the argument for giving it to foreigners? Well, I suppose the reason they give it to foreigners is because sometimes the foreigners have the skills to deliver, capacity to deliver. They may deliver more quickly. It may be simpler in terms of the contracting regulations, the international governments. And in certain cases, there's worries about corruption, inefficiency. I do not believe, though, that we should be in this black and white situation. I think we should be looking for a balance. And I think one of the problems about the way the international community works is that it's always going into these incredible ideological battles. So the British Department for International Development at the moment is insistent that it is going to give no money at all to international NGOs. It's going to give all its money to the Afghan government. And other agencies, USAID until recently, gave not that much as a percent of its overall portion of the Afghan government, but gave an enormous amount to contracting companies. What you really need to do is get a situation in which you can somehow try to analyze what the potential absorptive capacity of the Afghan government is. In other words, try to get a sense of how much the Afghan government can usefully spend today and how much they could usefully spend in a year's time. And then you need to give it to them with the correct kinds of regulations in place to enable them to spend it. But in other situations, it may be very beneficial to work with civil society organizations, grassroots organizations, or NGOs. So, to take an example of this project as a way of trying to explain this situation, Afghan government has a very strong role in this project. This project was created at the request of the President of Afghanistan. The Ministry of Culture provided the first impetus to support us in setting up the Institute. The Ministry of Education registers our schools, registers the certificates for graduating students. The Ministry of Urban Development works with us on doing the planning for this part of the city. And it's the Ministry of Urban Development in the end who signs off the plan, not us. And it's the municipality who makes sure that everything that we build is then maintained. There's no point us building a water network or sewerage or drainage unless the municipality maintains it. Furthermore, the Afghan government puts money into this project. The Afghan government is putting $1 million over the next 2 years into this project. But that doesn't mean that there's no role for the community and no role for the NGOs, because there are also things that we can do which the Afghan government maybe can't do. One of them is that I have much, much easier access to international conservation architects, engineers, craftspeople. It's much easier for me in setting up this institute to negotiate, for example, the fact that we've now accredited the institute with the City and Guilds in London, that we can get goods into the San Francisco Museum of Asian Art in order to sell the jewelry. For example, with the woodworkers, I have a Canadian woodworker working on joinery alongside it. Afghan craft masters working on carving. I have a Californian ceramicist working on the lead content in the glazes, alongside an Afghan craft master working on the throwing. Now, this is true for any government in the world. We shouldn't kid ourselves. This is true for the British government, this is true for the American government. Governments are not necessarily in a position to be as rapid, as flexible, as imaginative, as entrepreneurial as you might like. If you actually want to go into a part of the city, it may be better to say, okay, here is an NGO with 350 people, 30 international volunteers, most of whom are not paid. They're going to work 24 hours a day, and they're just going to do this thing up, and then they're going to hand it over to the Afghan government. That may be a more effective way of getting things done. So I get a little bit, I mean, here again, the institute, the school, which is another good example of how you can work with the government. So the students here from Sonoma Academy provide the money. Right, so that's private money from the United States. We provide the expertise because we have a German-trained expert on earth architecture who designs the building. But the Ministry of Education engineers work with us on every stage of the process so that they know how to replicate this. They then accredit it, they put it on their website, and then when Oxfam wants to build a school in the future, they can choose the option of this kind of school, and they can build it with the backing of the Ministry of Education. So that's a slightly convoluted answer, but I think we try to get away from this kind of black and white, either the government or not the government.